Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. I hope you guys are all doing great today. And today I kind of wanted to do a video on how you can keep all of your potted plants that you're keeping outside, whether it be perennials, trees, and shrubs, safe during the winter. So generally speaking, it is a little bit more tricky or it's a little bit more involved to try and keep perennials and stuff in pots safe over the winter because they're a little bit more exposed than they would be if they were in the ground. So they're above the soil, they're getting kind of bombarded by wind and things like that. So it's important to give your potted perennials a little bit of TLC. Now, the first thing to assess, well, before you overwinter any perennials is, well, what plants do you have? In general, if you're overwintering anything outside in a pot, it should be hardy to at least 2 zones lower than your current growing zone. And insofar as I know, all of the plants that I'm overwintering are hardy to at least a zone 4, and I'm a zone 6. So they should be good, except for the mums, which are hardy to a zone 5. But I'm going to try again to see if I can get mums to overwinter in pots. I haven't had good luck in the past, but I think if I give them a little bit more protection, I can. So that's number 1. Make sure that they are hardy to at least 2 zones lower than your current growing zone. Number 2 is to consider the pot type and size. So most of the pots that I have are resin pots, and I find them to be really useful because they actually they're sturdier material. So I find that to be a really good material. Other good materials would be things even like plastic, fiberglass, wood, even metal. But I would steer clear, generally speaking, of things like terracotta or clay or things like that because their walls are porous. And while that can be great in managing water, like making sure things have good aeration, if they're left outside in the winter and they're full of water, they can freeze and crack. And that can obviously ruin your pot. So we don't want that. Some things to look for to know when it's time to put your plants to bed are what their foliage looks like. Now, these were strawberries that I literally just cut back before I filmed this video. So your perennials should be kind of droopy, and they should be kind of brown, and they don't really look very good, but that's just a sign that they're heading into dormancy. And that typically happens after you've had at least several hard frosts, which we have. So these are all either dormant or going dormant. So you definitely want to wait to put your stuff to bed until they've gone dormant. Now, there are several ways to overwinter perennials in pots. I have tried a few, and so far, except for the mums, it's worked pretty well. So the first option, and this is probably the riskiest option, is to simply leave them where they were. Now, these pots were all moved to the side of my greenhouse. So I just kind of want to have all of them together. So I just keep all of them together, and they're a little bit more protected on the edge of the greenhouse. But if you don't want to move it and the pot's really big or heavy, you can leave them where they are. But again, it's important to note that they're a little bit more exposed. And something that's very important with all of these methods is to make sure that they are a little bit moist because you don't want them to dry out, but they should never be soggy. Soggy and wet feet is probably the worst thing for your plants over the winter, probably even more than the cold, because if they're in cold, wet soil, they will rot and die very quickly. So regardless of which method you use, I think this is especially important if they're more exposed and they're kind of just left in the elements. That's very important to consider. Another option is to do kind of like what I did and move them up against a structure, or like it could be the south side of your house or something like that. And for additional protection, what you can do is, if you have it, and I mean, you have a lot of trees, you have lots of leaves, but another thing you could do is like kind of hill them in with leaves and or straw if you have that, and or you can actually cluster them like this. So by clustering them, they kind of help to protect one another. So you can do that. And so yeah, those are some methods. And probably my favorite method is this. And this works mostly, I like to do this mostly for the spring bulbs and stuff I have in pots, is I simply dig a hole and bury them straight in the ground. Now the board is to keep too much moisture out, although that's probably not going to be a problem because I'm going to be covering all of these with a giant frost cloth. Or the last option I would say is you can actually put them in like an unheated garage where it isn't going to freeze. So, or at least not freeze too hard for too long. I know sometimes that can be hard, but at the very least, they'll be a little bit more protected. That's especially true if you're kind of like pushing the boundaries, like you want to do it like one zone lower or maybe your current growing zone. But it's, again, that is a risky proposition in general. But yeah, so I'm just gonna go ahead and cover these up, and then I will talk about what to do later on in the season and to know when it's time to bring them out. Here it is. This is the frost blanket laid out over all of my pots, and what I did is I just took some landscape staples and I just stapled it in the ground. So hopefully this works, and I think it will. This might not even be necessary, but you know, we'll see. I think it gives me a little bit more comfort knowing that they're a little bit more protected. Now, what do you do in the spring when it's time to bring them out? Or how do you know when it's time to bring them out? Now, I wouldn't necessarily say you have to wait until your last frost, because perennials in general are pretty hardy, and by the time it's time to bring them out, which in my zone is probably maybe mid-April, so I would say a week or so around Easter, roughly, is when I would start bringing these out. Because again, by that point, we're usually after the really, really cold temperatures, and we're starting to steadily warm up. If your plants are a little bit more tender, maybe wait a little bit later. But again, I would say once it starts to warm up in the spring, then you can start bringing these out and put them where they're gonna go, and hopefully they make it. And yeah, and then you can enjoy them for another year and just repeat this process again next spring when it's time to, or next fall when it's time to put them to bed again. So I hope you guys found this video informative, and if you have any questions, if there's anything I left out, I probably did. But if I left anything out, then just let me know, and please give me a like, comment, and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And I'll see you guys in another video here very soon. Thanks for watching.